This is Nick with S.E.E.K, the Society for Esoteric and Entheogenic Knowledge. I'm here with Jason from Elkdonis. It is an art collective based in Canada, but they have members all over the world. It is an emerging organization. I'd like to talk with him more about the organization itself, and also he is entrenched in the Iboga ceremonies of the Bwiti and beyond, and I'd like to get his perspectives there. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's great to be here and talk with you.
So where are you joining us from, just for people who aren't aware?
All right, I'm in Crystal Falls, Ontario, which is, for those who know Ontario, it's in between North Bay and Sudbury. So it's quite a bit north of Toronto. We're about 5 hours north of Toronto here.
And you said you just purchased property for Elkdonis initiatives?
Yeah, it's Elkdonis is a collective, so it's a team of us, and we get a lot more done together. So this happens a lot more quickly than everybody thought. We wound up getting this really quite amazing place. It's the pristine nature here is just so majestic and noble. It's breathtaking.
For those who aren't aware, we've talked prior. We didn't record that video interview, but we have spoken a little bit. I was reached out by an associate of yours, Dana. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to merge our collective intelligences and see where this journey may go for both of our organizations, and perhaps a unified effort in due time. So you recently did an Iboga trip. I have spoke with Dana Beal, a worldwide advocate leader in Ibogaine advocacy. He discussed his experience with Parkinson's disease and addiction, and how microdosing this substance greatly aided in his ability to overcome these challenges and live a normal life. What have you found in your practice in terms of the diagnoses that this sacrament helps with most for those who partake?
Well, it's if you're a skeptic about the realities of the inner world or spirituality, it's an anti-skeptic. It will give you a direct experience and verification and validation of things that most people never even encounter. Classes of being beyond human, like angelic classes of being and things like that. However, for healing, it does a really great amount of purification. So before we do any sort of visionary work, it's good to engage in purification work. Traditionally, what would happen is a person would be given a small amount of sacred Iboga along with an emetic. And sacred Iboga, if in large amounts, does make you feel nauseous and purge. And so when it's taken with the emetic, you're definitely going to purge. And so purging is very common to a lot of cultures that are centered in jungles. Bwiti comes from the Congo Basin area and Gabon and Cameroon, but it's La Purga or ayahuasca is also another drink that's purifies through vomiting, and it's common in Central America. I mean, if we don't purify before, say, the intention is to have a visionary experience or seek initiation or something, then often the person won't be able to recall any of the visions. When they're checked on during the ceremony by the person that takes care of them, they're obviously having visions and interacting with them and receiving helpful guidance, but then they don't recall them. So it's always, I mean, we live in modern times, so sometimes people can't devote like 10 days off to a ceremony. So sometimes they take a smaller amount and maybe go back into the game playing rules of ordinary life.
And maybe
quickly.
You can correct me, but in the Bwiti tradition, I've read that typically a large dose is the initiatic ceremony, and then throughout their lives after that, they take smaller doses on a more regular or frequent basis.
Bwiti has a broad amount of practices, and really, ultimately, every single nganga, every single like shamanic medicine practitioner will have a different way of doing things. But yeah, generally a person seeking initiation is usually younger and healthy and seeking a really powerful spiritual rebirth. So I've even heard of people taking up to 60 grams definitely going to place one in a coma briefly. But even with a smaller amount, say they just want some help with addictions or something, but they're willing to undergo some visionary experience, and they take, say, 15 grams or so, which is a standard amount for quitting things like smoking or something. They will still have a little bit of visionary experience sometimes, and when you're watching over them, they will appear like they're dead in a way. Like they'll become sort of pasty and unresponsive and almost dissociated, but at the same time, I know from my experience, you're very associated. So when you're in the realm of the dead, it's like, yeah, from a Western point of view, you're being poisoned by the alkaloids, and it's putting you into a mild coma-like state. So yeah, there's a large amount taken in one initiation in many different forms of Bwiti. And the initiation is very important often in the tribal societies. A person is considered immature without that initiation, in which they go through their birth and then they die and then they're reborn. So with the large amount, you do enter into the realm of the dead, both in a visionary sense, like an angelic being steps inside your physical human machine with you and starts showing you how to operate it from the inside. And then they might take you to another dimension where you'll be with the ancestors.
I've also read that this is not a euphoric entheogen, and that it doesn't provide the joy inherent in some other experiences of this nature. Would you describe it as a euphoric entheogen?
No, initiation is very much about joy. So Iboga is only one of the tools used. Some of the other tools are dance and song and darkness and fire and special music. And so everybody's dancing, sometimes for hours. Everybody's always touching in with each other, how you're feeling, and they're dancing. And they're alternating periods of extreme activity and body heat and physicality with periods of coming into rest and quietness and contemplation and silence and stillness and spaciousness. We keep alternating those things, and we're looking for something the whole time, and it's like we're looking for this interdimensional doorway during the ceremony, and it's the heart. When we find the key, it's always joy. So when you get in touch with those sorts of feelings when you're doing a ceremony, it's very easy to connect with joy with the group. And so joy is the key that opens the heart. And then these extraordinary things and expansions of consciousness can happen. For an initiate, there's a lot to adapt to. It's a totally different way of looking at the world. Like the human life it's more like a passageway when seen from a higher dimension. You're seeing your whole life as one. It's like a worm. And the shape of that passageway through life as a medium is the human life, but it's a transformational machine that transforms the essential being. But most people don't start out there. They start out just like maybe they know somebody that's involved in a group that's doing ceremonies, and you get to know it from the outside first. And then maybe they become interested in initiation and ask, and that can be offered to them sometimes.
It does seem that practitioners will first have to face this shadow self and go through memory and emotion before being able to kind of, like you were saying, rise above in a more objective perspective and see the interweaving patterns that are leading one toward this cosmic consciousness.
Yeah, that's part of the purification. So this type of work brings to light every action that you've ever taken. In fact, you may even have a vision of being guided through every action you've performed, especially with regards to other people. And you might experience it from their perspective and gain completely new insights. In short, though, it's a process where it's just too spot on, too intimate to think it's not some kind of inorganic beings that can guide your evolution. It doesn't seem like an intoxication, right? It seems very real. We know it's our imagination, but it's still very real. It's the imagination of the heart, not this made up, thought up imagination.
That's the dichotomy with like alcohol as well, which pulls you from consciousness or awareness with some of these entheogenic sacraments that will catalyze a more conscious or aware mode of being.
Alcohol is used by some healers. What happens with sacred iboga is you literally get to experience everything you've ever done to someone else. So you experience all of your karma in a way that you see it and you see what's true for you intimately. And it's a realization. So it changes you forever when you realize this truth. There's like something that's been bothering you, a pattern you've been going through and looping around, maybe somewhere the attention lives that, maybe isn't what you present to people, but it's the truth of what you're doing. You might have realizations about that and realize, oh, that's why, and sort of this healing happens just by going, yeah, it's true, that's true. It's the result of a dialogue, which is a stage of the Iboga experience. After the visionary experience, there's maybe a day or two where you're integrating, and it's, if a person's taken enough, it's as if there's a guide inside of your body with you, and there's a dialogue going on. And so all these things that you don't want to ask yourself and don't want to think about, it has access to, and it asks them. I'll try to think of a personal example. So I had some intentions as to help people and heal people and do some group work and to act as a spiritual father and initiator for people. To make it happen, I was kept awake all night by consistent visitors. It looked like my grandmother and my mother, who have both passed, as well as other presences. But they grilled me really harshly on what my intentions were until I was really, really clear on that. And then they took me through every secret hidden resentment that I didn't really even admit to myself that I was holding. So it would start out, I'd be in this state of peace and bliss, and then this sort of toxic feeling would start, and then this thought would start, and these thoughts would loop, and there'd be like this resentment, and then it would just get stronger until I was faced with it completely and unable to not respond somehow. And rather than the attention just seeking relief mechanically, there was this awareness to end this. One has to forgive. And that comes with all other kinds of realizations like love forgives all and things like that. But anyways, imagine spending a night going through every resentment of your entire existence in depth and then releasing them through forgiveness. So that's the kind of things that can happen with higher help. That's why when we opened, I suggested that we move into a posture that makes us feel more present and aligned. And then we connected with some high principles. Also, things like feeling remorse for things you've done wrong or your conscience can make you visible to higher help. As far as whether I believe there's these external beings that do something or whether I think it's an aspect of mind, I would say I have gone through lots of different beliefs about it, but currently it seems to me that matter arises from consciousness and not the other way around, that the truth comes from the imaginal realm. Reality comes from the imaginal realm. So the imaginal realm is more real than a human reality tunnel. The task of somebody that seeks initiation is to eventually be able to resonate with an infinite amount of qualities that exist in the imaginal realm as beings. Some might think of them as angelic beings or something, but qualities, say like the nourisher, the sustainer, qualities like that are needed in the world. Like people are starving, so they need nourishment, they need to be sustained. Resonating with that quality in the imaginal realm and calling it in. An initiation gives one the spiritual growth required to become aware of the realities of one's obligations as a human. But it's not for everybody, and there's no dogma around it. We have ceremonies where there's lots of non-initiates, and it's still very joyous, and we all leave with our hearts uplifted and our will to live increased.
I gave a presentation on initiation in global spiritual history, and you talked about how the stages of dissolution, reconfiguration, and transcendence seem to be this universal pattern. In regards to
Yeah.
the material world versus the spiritual, the Hindu Maya, this world of illusion and everything that's tangible that we can see is not the true reality. I think that's an important thing to recognize across spiritual systems as well. You had mentioned this maze that we're all having to traverse on this imaginal subconscious level, and
Yeah.
that reminded me of the Theseus and the Minotaur and this labyrinth, conquering the animal nature and coming back with some kind of revelatory truth from the ordeals that we undergo.
I think of the labyrinth as our emotional, intellectual complex, right? And everybody has a different emotional, intellectual complex. It's perceivable by me as like a shape of their attention, and they pass through their life with this shape, right? And so it's interesting to see that people that are vastly different than me, that I can't understand or might even project things onto, actually have the exact same birthright to initiation and spiritual power as other people. So there's this coming together of typicalities that wouldn't normally tolerate each other in our group that I'm trying to talk about. It's really becoming such a joyous thing for everybody. And I mean, people of all types, people with divergent neurologies, for example, they just have a different shaped attention. When one understands what different shapes of attention, what are their strengths and their weaknesses, one can really work to erase the divisions between people on all levels, not just religion. I really like your work, by the way. I watched a few more of your videos before we talked just now, and I was asking all those questions for a long time, and that's kind of how I came to a sacred Iboga. Like when I found out about it, it was the Howard Lotsof story. I was working with and crashing around with rituals and using other psychedelics at that point, and I hadn't encountered my main benefactors or teachers yet. I had somebody that I was doing other healing work for, and they asked me to find a way to heal someone of heroin addiction that they cared about. And so we set this up, and I found a supplier for sacred Iboga. At that time, it was legal in Canada. So I managed to procure some, and the internet existed, but there wasn't anywhere near the amount of information there is now. So there was nothing from, say, traditional practitioners of Bwiti or anything. But I did what I could to find out what I could. I looked at all kinds of African diaspora traditions and spoke to people from those traditions in some cases, and they were amazing and helpful. And so I just followed my instincts the best I could, and my intention became to really open up to this and to become like a full-fledged healer or a teacher with this power plant that I thought could guide our evolution. And so I formed all these intentions as I was guided to, and did some purifications, and then I had this experience that was very surprising. And it went through certain stages, and there was amazing phenomena in each stage and qualities and characteristics. And then a few years later, I continued working with it. I got in touch with in that session. But years later, I found out that the experience I had was the typical traditional experience with all the same archetypes and the same outcomes. And it sort of validated for me the reality of the Bwiti cults. I found myself working with Fang Bwiti, which is a little bit more syncretic than the other forms of Bwiti. I recommend working with all the different forms because they work with the tools in different ways.
I'll get into those different lineages in just a sec. I'm glad that you found value in the S.E.E.K content. It does seem we're aligned in trying to promote this unitive, tolerant way of looking at global spirituality. Once you move beyond the subjective understanding of your individual framework, and you start to compare and analyze the metaphorical, the symbolical, the allegorical interpretations of various faiths, all of these traditions seem to unite at this mystical peak where the pathway up may be different based on orthodox literature or subjective interpretation, but the more you study, the more you can come to this united awareness at the top of this mountain. And then also you had mentioned the shadow self, and Carl Jung, Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, talks about how we have to merge our subconscious with our conscious, bring the things from the imaginal great beyond into our daily reality, and integrate ourselves in the alchemical conjunctio, so to speak. I appreciated that thought as well.
Sure. The shadow's pretty dark and scary for some people, but it's actually a really rich gift when you go into it. If there's a surprise in there, I recommend persisting in any sort of developing an understanding or actually doing the work with a guide.
I definitely agree. I'm going to get into this. Traditional Bwiti lineages generally view Iboga as a sacrament embedded within music, ritual, ancestor communication, divination, fasting, and initiatory ordeal, whereas Western clinics often isolate Ibogaine hydrochloride as a pharmacological compound for addiction interruption or trauma therapy. How do traditional Bwiti initiates distinguish between the spiritual use of whole Iboga root bark and the Western clinical isolation of Ibogaine? And what are your thoughts there?
Western capitalist systems are economically centered and they don't take into consideration other people's well-being, whereas nearly all tribal systems are centered around considering other people's well-being and all relations to all manner of life and ecosystems in the entire cosmos. So yeah, there's a big difference there in what the center of it is.
Do you think that there can be an effective experience outside of the traditional framework?
I see people that will resist Iboga. They might come for a healing or something, but still there's a heavy resistance, and even they receive help. Maybe they're resistant to, anything spiritual in general, and so they don't want to have anything shake that, but they still receive benefit from an Iboga healing. Definitely, usually people wake up and say, wow, I feel so much physically better. It can go so far as to restore you to a state of inner well-being like that you haven't had since you were a little child. And when you regain that as an adult that hasn't had it for a long time, it can be quite tense and meaningful, and you might not want to lose that. It can change your behavior just by putting you in touch with inner well-being.
Yeah, beautifully said. I think it's interesting to consider whether healing arises from strictly chemistry or from the ritual context, the mythic structure, the communal integration, and symbolic death, rebirth experiences.
There's all kinds of methods, and any good teacher healer is going to have lots of them. So you don't really have to worry about what path. If you find a good teacher, they're going to have methods from all over the place anyways.
What are your thoughts regarding taking this sacrament out of its ritual container, where you have this mythic structure, these allegorical trials, tribulations, this community with this heritage and lineage of ancestral knowledge?
If people say they're like hardcore fentanyl addicts on the street, and someone comes up and says, I'll give you $12,000 to go to that clinic in Mexico and take Ibogaine with a nurse watching over you the whole time, and it has absolutely none of the cultural roots or none of the actual teachings of the Iboga plant, the ancestors, none of that connection, just here's the chemical, you're going to stay here for this long, and then you can go home and you won't want to do it anymore. I mean, that still sounds pretty good, right? If we can literally reset people's brains so that they're not addicted, then I think that's a good thing. But if you wanted to fulfill your purpose or find out how to live well as a human, how to meet all the suffering in the world well, how to evolve, if you want to fulfill the call to grow and change and be a part of your community and be a leader, initiation isn't just limited to spirituality. We undergo worldly initiations in our relationships, in jobs. Our relationship starts out and you're not committed, and then you get committed, and if you take it to the end, it winds up with something close to God realization, where you're seeing, in the case of a man with a woman, you're seeing every woman in them. It's It's a really divine thing. And the same with the job too, right? Like you can go up to a certain stage where you're not that committed, not that reliable. You become more reliable, then you're actually adding to the field. Then you're like almost independent. The field is following you, and then you might do something large in the world. And then there might even be a selflessness where there's a God realization at the end of that. So worldly initiations, historically, especially, and in tribal cultures, tend to mirror or be almost the same as the steps on the spiritual path.
I was just going to say, I think that's inherent in the transition from words like psychedelic, which have more of a recreational, or hallucinogen, which is more physiological, transitioning over to the word entheogen, generating the divine within. The inherent God realization is an important thing to emphasize.
Sure. I mean, if you're interacting with people that speak onomatopoeic languages, not English, not German, not French, where it's like subject, object, verb, right? And there's this implied separation, and there's me and there's you. In these languages of these tribal people, the way it would actually be translated, it's like the greenness proceeding from my eye is treeing over there, right? And so there's no implied separation. And so right away there's hardwired neuronal chains for perceiving connection. But the good thing about psychedelics is that they temporarily help you transcend language and maybe perceive the same thing as somebody that is more geared towards that. And so it's valuable for the Western mind. But obviously, with certain pleasurable ones, there's always a danger of like a hedonistic approach, which can kill you or have a negative effect. And some spiritual masters, I'm sure, would say, you know, if you're gonna be taking MDMA and LSD every weekend at raves, then you're not serious. What are you wasting my time for? In my experience, some people have a lack of sensitivity and a resistance, and they're emotionally closed down and they're heavily armored, but maybe they want to open up a bit. And sometimes a tiny bit of sacred Iboga mixed with ashwagandha, mixed with rhodiola. These are legal adaptogenic herbs that also support states of euphoria and expansion and relaxation, and they eliminate the blood chemistry associated with negative states and negative emotions. So they do provide windows where, you know, if you were to do something like dance with your friends and seek joy, it might lead somewhere.
Dana Beal also mentioned that he found psilocybin mushrooms useful with the intake of Ibogaine.
I was really challenged early on in healing work because I wasn't doing it as a economic activity. I was doing it based on the experiences I had, which kind of guided me to just, I wouldn't have to do it. Something ineffable was going to do this through me. And so I didn't have to go out and look for people. And that turned out to be true. And I wound up being specialized in people that are often involved in, they're just out of jail, or they're involved in organized crime, or they're bikers, or they're ex-drug dealers, like people that might not trust a lot of people, but for some reason they come to me. Now it's mostly a word of mouth thing, and there's a lot of healing that goes on there. But the thing that's strange is, like, so say you were to go to a clinic in Mexico, and they might be like, you're 35. No, we're sorry, we can't do it, it's too dangerous. But the average age of the people that come to me is probably 60. People might even think that it's irresponsible of me to do this, but here's an example of how it would happen. I had this gentleman hear through word of mouth that he could become free of opiate addiction. And so he proved to me that he was committed and showed up and came over, never having met me, willing to like talk about it and make all the arrangements to do this. So of course I have to take a bit of a medical history for that. So I asked him, you know, do you have any heart problems? His age, I was like willing to overlook that. He's only 30 years over the limit. it was whimsical. I was sort of like trying to see what would happen for some reason. I don't know why, just my intuition did. Because normally at that point in time, I would have just said no to anybody that age. So I wouldn't want to take the risk of somebody having a heart attack. And Ibogaine, especially, it affects heart rhythm. It affects different mechanisms that your heart needs to beat regularly. But anyway, so with this gentleman, he came over. First question, total fail. Like, yes, I have heart disease. I'm on 3 different medications. Next question, I'm like contemplating how I'm going to tell him I can't do it because he really wants this and needs it. Next question is, any history of heart disease in your family? Yeah, my father and grandfather died of heart attacks. And so I'm like, sorry, there's no way I can do it. I'm saying this in my head and I'm just about to say it to him. And neither of us were on any psychedelics. Neither of us had taken Iboga. We hadn't even done an allergy test or anything. And all of a sudden we heard all of this drumming, African tribal music, and a parade of like 40 or 50 tribal Africans came in fully dressed in full regalia, filled with so much joy and singing with such confidence and spirit that it just made you like, we were both literally rolling around on the floor laughing, crying at the same time. That's how intense it was. And you know what these beings said? You're going to treat them. We're going to show you how. And you know what they showed me? Up until this point, I was like, oh yeah, I know you have to take like 25 grams television kind of thing. They said, no, you can just give them a tiny bit, a tiny pinch, and then you give them, they directed me to give them Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds. And so 3 Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds plus this pinch. Remember, this person had already had the visionary experience with nothing. So when they had this pinch, and I mean, 3 Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds is almost nothing too. It completely opened them up and they had the full traditional experience, visionary experience. The only hitch that happened was at a certain point, they had such a strong realization about something. They felt like they had to leave immediately. They realized that they were in love with someone. So they found the reason to never use again. I followed up. Eventually, just the woman that this man realized he loved was calling me, and yearly, just to say thank you. So I've had some pretty amazing experiences that are hard to classify.
That's a beautiful anecdote. I appreciate you sharing. You mentioned kind of a tendency to help those that are maybe criminally minded. It kind of echoes back to the Concord prison experiment of the early 70s and Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, later Ram Dass, helping decrease recidivism within prison systems, which I think is an interesting concept for a psychedelic application. I was going to ask you just about the different traditions of Bwiti. Can you explain the major differences, especially regarding cosmology, healing, and initiation structures?
Okay, why don't I just talk about the general initiation pattern that has already been revealed to Westerners, so I'm not doing anything forbidden in terms of what I talk about. I asked one of the master healers I know to talk to you, and he was like, no, it's forbidden. So I don't want to like share things that aren't mine to share.
Maybe I can just read a brief sentence of each just so people can become aware, and then you can correct me or elaborate on what you feel safe talking about. Dasumba is often regarded as one of the oldest root forms of Bwiti. Misoko traditions are frequently associated with diagnosis, visionary knowledge, healing plants, and spiritual protection. And then, as you somewhat hinted toward, the Fong Bwiti integrated Christian and Catholic symbolism during colonial contact, creating a syncretic initiatory system. Some traditions initiate both men and women together, while others maintain more differentiated initiatory roles.
Generally, like in my experience, a lot of Fang ceremonies have men and women, and then the Mitsoko and Babongo have more of a separation between the men and the women, but it's more like there's a women's teaching and a men's teaching. So the male Nganga will come and bow to the women's leader, and she'll bow back, and then during the celebration at the end, the women do a dance. The male Ngangas do a dance at another part, and it's really really beautiful altogether, just these two. Because women and men are, a woman has a womb and a man doesn't, for starters. And so a woman resonates with the void more than a man. So I think myself that there's something to that, that a man and a woman can get different teachings. But at the same time, we do ceremonies that have both and initiate both together too. Maybe at some point in our group, a strong woman leader will emerge, like Dana perhaps, and lead like the women's side of it more in the ceremonies.
Within the Hindu framework, there's the Sri Yantra symbol with Shakti and Shiva, the male-oriented consciousness and the female-oriented creative energy. Traditional initiation ceremonies may last several days and include sacred music, darkness, fasting, firelight, chanting, ancestor invocation, and prolonged visionary immersion. Anthropological accounts describe the initiate confronting personal history, mortality, ancestral identity, and cosmological origin narratives. Bwiti initiation is often described as a symbolic death and rebirth. What does that actually mean for the experience of the initiate?
Yeah, here's what I would like to describe to you. The sort of like archetypal pattern of initiation, of a traditional initiation. So this information has already been shared with Westerners. I'll share it now. So the initiate has come to know the group from the outside, right? Maybe they've been to some of the ceremonies before, but they've never sought initiation. And then they get interested in initiation, and they would receive some preparatory work, but eventually they would come for the ceremony, and they may do a purification. Most likely they'll do a purification ceremony for a day. And then the main part of the initiation, the intent is found from the person, their intention. And then once that is found, there might be a long walk through the forest, like up to 20 kilometers, focusing on the intention. And at the end of that, there'll be a purification in the river. It's where the person's naked in nature in a river, and you're rubbing salt on yourself to draw out the blockages to your intention and getting your intention blessed by your ancestors. And then it's a river that travels to the west usually. And so then the salt is washed off and it goes downstream, and going towards the west is symbolic of going into death. So you're releasing these blockages into death. And then after that, after you're purified, then you swim upstream, and usually there's a symbol of a yoni, a vulva, that one crawls through to symbolically be reborn. And then you'd come out and begin taking the Iboga and enter into death, right? And this is done in various ways. There's a lot of dancing and singing and music and, torches and darkness and the stars and nature and all kinds of things that play into this. So after that, after death, of course, comes rebirth. And so the initiate literally has an visionary experience of dying and going to the realm of the dead and learning a lot of things and growing. And then they're reborn. And so at a certain point, the candidate, they usually have a heavy body load, so it's kind of difficult for them, right? A large amount of sacred Iboga makes it so you can't walk or move very easily. But they're expected by the community to show that they're back and that they've retrieved soul and strength from the next place. So they dance for the community, and then it's a celebration of their return that starts, and everybody's in touch with this joy and their hearts are open. It's a very joyous thing.
That seems to be a pattern across esoteric systems, with was kind of hinting at prior, with this dissolution, symbolic death, dismemberment, some kind of ego dissolution prior to this reconfiguration of consciousness, framed as finding the alchemical elixir or the Philosopher's Stone before re-emerging in this hero's journey to share with the community this gift that's been provided in terms of a learning experience and a reformation of consciousness.
Yeah, but there's many realizations required before one finds the primary realization that evolves one. And so there's many necessary realizations before the primary one. And the primary one, even though we're talking about unity, and maybe someone might associate that with non-duality, that might not be the primary realization. The primary realization may be the unity of all religions, which is actually not a non-dual realization. It's multiple. So this path can be very surprising. And it doesn't always fit words or models. It's very ineffable too, right? But basically, what happens is the person goes through a stage of proving their commitment. And then there's some stages where there's testing of that commitment, and each success builds on their commitment. And then at a certain point, they've been around the impressions long enough that they actually have an understanding of how to do this work with this teaching. And then after that, they will encounter an ideal. Here's the path to enlightenment, or here's the ideal of enlightenment or awakening or something. And then after that, the next step, they may try to have the ideal, bring the ideal to life inside themselves. And then the next stage, they might actually wind up smashing their ideal on reality and encountering the absolute or all reality as one unity, one being. And then there's a step beyond that where they might get into a personal relationship with it. And so, it's gone even beyond the point where they no longer are following their ego. Their heart tells them what to do. Now they're actually in dialogue with all and everything as God. And so the God realization is just half of the full path, though. The full path of initiation, and it goes beyond self-realization. The second half of it always involves turning that self-realization into service. So the first few steps beyond self-realization are rarely reached by any humans, and they involve, becoming a part of spiritual government on Earth. Like you become a teacher in a real lineage, maybe, or a guide of some sort. And then beyond that, there's the actual cosmic spiritual hierarchy. And if you're a Christian, you might perceive the spirit of the messenger as Christ. If you're a Muslim, you might perceive it as Muhammad. If you're a Buddhist, it's Buddha, etc. And I was speaking about that non-dual realization that all religions and paths are equally valid. In other words, the absolute is infinite, so there's no limits to enlightenment. It keeps on going on forever.
Completely in agreement. I think it's interesting, once you start reconfiguring your consciousness toward improvement, eventually you do cognize this archetypal form, the best way to think, the best way to act, the best way to be. And that realization keeps you striving for these archetypal moments within your own personal journey. And in Tibetan Buddhism, they have the bodhisattvas, Manjushri, Vajrapani, and Avalokiteshvara. And I feel like you're also describing, once you have this wisdom, it must transition into service. And this whole bodhisattva ideal is a Buddha to be that is forsaking nirvana until even the grass becomes enlightened.
Yeah. One of the things that comes through with the Iboga ceremonies is that this validation and verification that we don't die, that death is a doorway. And so the implications of that are really life-changing.
Like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Bardo Thadal, and that this is a transitory process from one life to the next. Not an end by any means, rather a birth into the next phase of our existence.
Sure, the Bardo Thadal, the teaching that liberates through hearing in the Bardo. The Bardo is the in-between space. So it can, if you have heard that teaching, supposedly it can wake you up when you're in between life and death.
Sorry, the Psychedelic Experience by Timothy Leary, Ralph Metzner. They use the Tibetan Book of the Dead directly. in terms of the
Yeah.
psychedelic metaphor.
Yeah. It wasn't relevant enough for a Western culture, so there have been several versions of them that are more relevant. And part of the path is it's entering into what's called the corridor of madness, and it's where your essential being is consuming the personality, and the personality is transforming and becoming passive to the essential being, and it can really unbalance a person. And so it's called the corridor of madness. And so it's been rewritten to help people to perceive like where they are and become liberated from that. But what you were saying about bodhisattvas and Buddhas, so a bodhisattva is someone that has realized liberation in the bardo. So they've encountered either the clear light of the void, or they've encountered the secondary visions where they're projecting their consciousness onto it as it unravels and they return to their native state. But eventually, a bodhisattva is someone that has come to realize the truth in their native state. And rather than merging into that gently and blending into that voidness of the void, they choose to re-enter and be of service.
Yeah, and to your point about the divine, the madness corridor, I think Plato described that as theomania, this divine madness that is inherent, that is part of that reconfiguration process of dissolving our old self and getting lost in this world of what to become and who we really are, that we start to ask the questions that then give us the answers to move forward toward a more transcendent state. And the next question I had was, what are the greatest misunderstandings that the Western psychedelic culture has about both Bwiti and Iboga?
Some of the fundamental ones are inherent in our language or our conditioning. I'd like to answer that by talking about what somebody who's experienced initiation might be working on in their life, what the focus of their life might become like, to give people a kind of an idea of what that path is like. And also keep in mind, worldly initiations lead to this too. Like take your job all the way to the level where you're a space traveling billionaire, or if you take your relationship to the point where you literally see your partner as divine, you see every person in them, then yeah. An initiate's in the short term, they're gonna be working on developing their heart. And so that means like if somebody pisses you off or you're disappointed or whatever, you have the height and the width and the depth for that to enter and then to handle it. And spirituality at that point is basically being able to say, I got this, when you're called to do something. The medium-term work is developing realization. So the short-term work's the heart, the medium-term work is developing realization. These things interact with each other. Like if you haven't developed the heart, then you can't develop realization. And the long-term work is developing character. And character is a result of, your genetic heritage, your spiritual heritage, and your conditioning. And so Westerners are all different. Some of them have a really dynamic spiritual heritage, and then they have very little conditioning, or they're from a culture that has supportive conditioning and they're quick study. But typically Westerners are really lost in really what are dark labyrinths created by beings with an interest in control, in my opinion. It's pretty total. It's kind of like people want an answer. They want to talk about it. They want to have theories. Well, we're talking about something that's ineffable and beyond understanding. So all that we can really do is submit to it. And so the art of submitting to it is really an art. When people find it for themselves and people find a teacher and they start developing and evolving and their gradation of reason is objectively improving, their life will change. Their life will become better. Their relationships will become better.
The next question's a little long, but I do want to get your thoughts on it. Ibogaine has drawn scientific interest because many participants report autobiographical memory review, interruption of compulsive behaviors, emotional catharsis, and reduced withdrawal symptoms. Emerging studies involving veterans with traumatic brain injury reported improvements in PTSD symptoms, anxiety, and cognitive functioning following magnesium ibogaine therapy. Many researchers suspect neuroplasticity glutamatergic modulation, sigma receptor activity, and increased expression of neurotropic factors. How is the conversation around Iboga changing among veterans, neuroscientists, lawmakers, and trauma researchers in both Canada and the United States, in your opinion?
It's kind of like the early yoga movements. I remember hearing about real Indian masters, and Hatha yoga is just a small part of their system. But when they heard, even though in spite of it being overly commercialized and not teaching the teaching, just teaching the exercise part of it, when they heard that it was spread wide in the West, tears would come to their eyes because it's a start, right? And things have to start somewhere. And if they start out as a hedonistic consumer product, that's fine too. But eventually, maybe we'll come to a point where we're recognizing the value of thousands of years of symbiotic relationship with plant consciousness and the culture that developed to work with it. There are people acting to try to bring this to the West. And if you look at the NGOs from all the Bwiti societies, I mean, something amazing just happened, actually. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but the Bwiti societies aren't the only cults that use Iboga, and they're not the only groups, cults in that area. So of, Cameroon and the Congo Basin and Gabon. And so a whole bunch of different spiritual leaders recently got together and had basically an agreement and a conference about how to be in relationship with the West in terms of they now want to have this resource. They know that Big Pharma just wants to strip away the molecule and synthesize it if possible, but it's an opening. Who knows what can happen?
Comparing more modern entheogens like LSD with Ibogaine, there's the connection with Claviceps purpurea and the Eleusinian mysteries and this Kykeon sacrament,
Yeah.
and Albert Hoffman et al. Did write that book, The Road to Elysis, which was a few decades after this creation of LSD, but I do think there are connections throughout history that we could definitely frame the LSD experience within.
If you were to take some old Hawaiian baby woodrow seeds that are available on the internet, it's very different than if you go to Hawaii and find a vine and sit with it for a few days and then take some of the seeds. It will show up to you as like a lion made of light that brings pure bliss and gives you all the spiritual knowledge. If you take it, the dried ones at home and in your normal setting, it might be very, very little effects, just sort of like, oh, my stomach hurts. I feel a bit weird. So I think that there are like subtleties that we do miss out on unless if we open up to tribal wisdom. LSD, is used by a lot of teachers, and it does have a similar type of effect in which you know the truth. I have a friend that's an ayahuasquero, and I shared LSD with him, and he said, "Oh, I could feel with this just like ayahuasca." So he saw the potential. But with sacred Iboga, it's completely different. It's as if there's these other beings present guiding you. And it's kind of, even somebody that doesn't know that that's going to happen, that takes it, has that experience too. And sometimes the content is remarkably similar. Like, we're like, okay, we're going to show you the story of the creation now. We'll show you all of time using what I call now the fast brain. Like Iboga can turn on a part of your neurology that it's like fast thinking. So you could go through all of time in a short period of time.
And you had mentioned briefly the medical risks. I just want to touch on that briefly just to provide a comprehensive perspective. Ibogaine is associated with significant cardiac risk in vulnerable individuals, particularly QT interval prolongation and arrhythmias. Responsible clinics often require EKG screening, liver function assessment, medication review, and medical supervision. In your opinion, what are the primary medical risks of Iboga and Ibogaine, and how do responsible practitioners mitigate?
You don't want to take a lot of Iboga if you have gastrointestinal illness.
Okay.
It's a cellular material that can't be digested. So if you don't vomit it, it's hard to digest. And it doesn't help those illnesses very much. It might remove some of the psychological component, but it will probably worsen the condition just because it's such an intense purge.
Dana Beal had mentioned that you have to stay hydrated as well because it can pull a lot of water from the body.
I would recommend, if someone's going to try it on their own, that they take chlorella or something like that with a lot of supporting nutrients and enzymes and things like that to strengthen your system, because it's, I mean, okay, one time I heard somebody liken the full-on Iboga initiation experience. They said it's like riding down a mountain on a door. That's what they likened it to. That's how intense it was for them. And so, yeah, you want to prepare your body and take care of yourself afterwards.
What are your steps prior to a ceremony that you would walk through with somebody that's about to try it? And then what kind of integration following do you implement?
Well, for somebody that's joining as an initiate, we already have a standing relationship at that point where we're sort of like family. But if somebody's coming for healing, for preparation work, I would have them do journal work that ask some of the questions that the spirits might ask, and you might even get into some serious shadow work, journaling. So I would provide them with journal prompts from my teachers that my teachers shared with me. And then that kind of begins this like movement of energy that starts this healing momentum. And then they go through the ceremony and they receive that benefit. And then afterwards, there's follow-up work and more journal work and sometimes deeper work involving ritual theater as follow-up. And I find if you're working with somebody that's, say, like, you know, they're a drug addict and they can't move, and then they come and they get a break in terms of their chemistry, like they don't have the same urge or necessity to do it physically, but maybe they haven't cleared away any of the patterns that led to it or the real root of it. So, you know, you need to have a lot of strategies and resources in place to make sure that any benefit you receive stays with you and that you build on it. You can't, it's not just a magical bullet where you take sacred Iboga and you're no longer a drug addict. You have to want it. You have to have real necessity. That's the nature of all real spiritual transmission. The person that is receiving it has necessity. If they don't have that necessity in reality, it won't come through the other person. Right? So as a healer, I don't really have to prepare too much or anything. The person's necessity will call these qualities required for them through me. And a lot of it's really interesting, like learning all the steps is really amazing, and it just keeps unfolding and unfolding. I mean, you learn things like, oh, if I talk in my head, it's kind of annoying to people and they resist. If I talk a little lower in my throat, you know, it's easier. People want to agree. If I talk in my heart, if I talk from my heart to someone, they actually can't resist it. So you learn a lot about power. You learn how to assess people, you know, like physically, emotionally, in many ways. There's a lot of different vectors coming into people's lives these days and a lot of different zones in people's lives. And so you have to be able to assess all the strengths and weaknesses and really provide them with something that's meaningful to them and of personal concern so that they validate and verify inner work for themselves. And then once they've verified it, it enters into their being as understanding, and that's going to be a permanent change.
I like what you said also. You know, the S.E.E.K motto is seek and you shall find. And it's important that you have to be seeking in order to find. And these things have to be at the front of the mind and they have to be a true desire. You also mentioned ritual labs. We briefly have spoken about those prior, but for those who may not be aware, can you describe what that entails?
Sure. Ritual labs are awesome. It's ritual theater. It was originally developed in ancient times, of course, but in more modern times, I'm heavily influenced by Gurdjieff in the fourth way, and he was a dance master, so he brought a lot of performative dance techniques. But some of his students were involved in other areas of the art, and actually a lot of our culture was influenced by Gurdjieff, which is little known. In the 1920s and 1940s, a lot of the people that were following him and interested in him wound up being movie directors and artists and musicians that influenced our culture a lot. So the ritual theater was some students of Gurdjieff, namely Peter Brook and Jerzy Grotowski, a Polish film director or theater director. And so he developed this form of theater based on the impressions he was receiving. And it went through several stages. The stage that is most like what we're doing was called paratheater, which means the skills that go along with theater. But he also did things like theater of sources and there was a few other stages to his work. Theater of sources would be you're experimenting with, say, things from particular cultures, or like the Bwiti system, or you mentioned various Hindu systems. So you might be taking methods and tools from them and using them as an actor to see what state they put you into. The ritual theater is really great for modern people because it gives you a chance to experience initiation, and it's self-guided. So there's no danger, there's no lack of safety because you're responsible for your own safety and there's nobody else doing it with you. We do it together online in Zoom, for example. Sometimes we use other platforms, but the idea is that it's an asocial space. So nobody's engaging socially at all. They're just there to work on themselves. And in fact, we darken the lights, and you don't really, if somebody isn't standing in front of the camera and trying to be seen, you might not even see what they're doing too much, but we're sharing a space and working on each other together. So it's really, a lot of people find it really safe and a good place to explore themselves. And then with the sort of unseen support of other people doing the same thing, it helps you to break through. It's like there's a larger field of attention. So what we do is, like in Jungian terms, we do various activities to wake ourselves up to the super conscious and the unconscious and archetypal levels of reality. So we're going down through the subconscious and coming into relationship with that, and eventually we enter into the transpersonal, where we're sensing each other in nonlinear ways, and then we encounter the archetypal and the mythic. Once we encounter a force in paratheater, like say we're working with a polarity like want, don't want. So what we would do in that instance, so how would you embody want, right? So what we do is the crux really of paratheater is being able to enter into like an empty, no form state, like Zazen. So you're completely emptying yourself. But it's unhooked from mysticism because it's like an acting thing. We're doing theater. So the reason you're getting as empty and relaxed as you can is so that you can be sensitive to these qualities when you're resonating with them and calling them in so you can act them. So we all go around unconsciously projecting all the time is one idea that's out there. So what we do is we consciously project. So we might project onto an area this quality of want, I want it, right? And then beside it, we project the quality of I don't want it. And then around that, we have projected the quality of no form or emptiness. And so we enter into a profound emptiness, and then we step into one of the qualities, and we scan our body and find a contact point, a point of tension. And the theory is that point of tension is where the energy is entering you. And so once we find the points of tension, we resonate a sound with it. And when we resonate the sound with it, the point of contact, for some reason in everybody so far, it tends to awaken spontaneous movement and speech. And like you get into the role, all of a sudden it becomes accessible. And then you can deepen it through just letting it come through you. We have different intentions with that builds. We start by merging. We go into surrender, we go into service, we might ask it questions, we might find what would motivate us to remain in connection with it. So in these polarities, want, don't want, say you start out by thinking, oh, this one's probably negative and this one's positive. There's always a surprise in it because you're moving between these qualities, right? And so you're seeing different contact points, different things are emerging. We deepen it till we find the mask and we find the walk. And so we can really embody this quality and act it. Like, it's like a shaman acting. It really is. You're possessed by want, or you're possessed by I don't want it. Ooh. But, you know, sometimes spontaneous speech comes out. Sometimes a whole play enters into your mind and you kind of act it out minimally or something. And then you're jumping back and forth between these qualities. And what happens is they reconcile, and you start to see that there's a part of you that's present in these opposite seeming qualities. And so it's not like completely different identities, separate identities. You realize there's a part of you that unifies them, and it will change your relationship with the qualities. So you'll start to see them in your everyday life. They'll be like alarm clocks that remind you to be present and pay attention. They'll wake you up, much the way that, say, taking a microdose of mushrooms does. So you'll actually come into relationship with the qualities as real inorganic beings in your life. It's very, very amazing way to experience self-initiation into the inner world and the reality of it, and to encounter the mythic and the archetypal. For me, besides the, like, you know, developing the heart and realization and character, there's this call to become like an ideal archetype, and to try to perfect yourself towards an ideal like that, and internalize the ideal and actualize the ideal and connect with the divine beyond that, and then be of use.
That's really fascinating. I definitely want to partake one of these days with you in this ritual theater space. There's the concept of the thesis, the antithesis, and then the synthesis. And it seems to be very much what you're describing. Maybe next time we can center the interview on more talk about the ritual theater aspect of Elkdonis.
Sure, I'll even give you some links in case any of your audience wishes to try it out. We're about to launch a bunch of online courses, Elkdonis Arts. We have like a nature space for retreat and classes and stuff, but we also have some online infrastructure. And so we're going to be promoting the paratheater thing, because we think it's a good thing for people to try out. And so I'll give you a link for your people to come and try it out for free if they want, or even just witness.
Please do. You also spoke about a mobile bookstore of sorts for a U.S. tour. I don't know if you want to mention that now, or if that's something to say for a later date.
So many projects going on right now. It's sometimes a little overwhelming, but every different member of the group has kind of like their own purpose that they're playing out, and then we all get a lot more done together. But yeah, we're planning on doing a tour. It might have gotten pushed back until next year now, because the idea was to do the tour and then buy some property, but instead somebody donated some property, and now we're going to do the tour. So it's unfolding.
It's beautiful to have too much rather than too little happening. I said it's beautiful to have too much rather than too little happening.
Yeah, and meeting with you and talking with you is part of it, right? It's like there's this, sometimes it almost seems to me like the world has gone through a membrane and understanding or evolution or gradation of reason, and there's more good stuff going on. And so I see what you're doing as really important, and so do the masters, the grand master of all the Bwiti societies in Gabon. Like they want the public to know that they're not okay with business people coming and taking the molecule and not taking all of the wisdom, because they think it's a sacred gift for humanity that can actually help the world.
Right? Something similar happened with Maria Sabina and the Mazatec initiation with Arguard and Wasson in the 50s, and taking the psilocin, the psilocybin, out of the mushrooms, pharmacologically reproducing them, and then doing
Yeah,
experimentation with those isolates. I can see
yeah,
comparable parallels there.
yeah. So I mean, the relationship between anthropologists and people of power has shifted a lot. I know that Gordon Wasson and Marie Sabina, there's some stories about him kind of taking advantage of her and then her being persecuted by people in her belief system and in her community that were against that belief system.
I want to
And
believe
that's,
she knew what would happen and that she willingly chose to
mm,
provide this to the West in order to flower
yeah,
it
that would be
globally. But
brilliant.
I can see the problems. But yeah, her son was murdered, her house was burned down, and she definitely
Yeah.
experienced a lot of negativity from that decision, if it was a decision.
And that might be related to your question, right? Like that might be people that were concerned about the West getting what's not theirs, really, and doing what they've done with everything else, which is take it.
Yeah, I framed it as getting the keys of wisdom before climbing the mountain. Typically, you have to climb this mountain and ascend through all this hard work, personal effort in order to attain the keys. But sometimes those keys are given to people without having to climb this mountain, and that's where I feel like problems may arise.
Well, I'm witnessing everything unfold, and it's as I was saying before, like we have to learn to open up to higher influences and higher help in a way that's, intimately meaningful to us, and that's what each of us can contribute to this. For example, if you were to do some shadow work and release some real resentments you hold and forgive, you might find that, oh, now there's peace talks going on in that country, and there might be some reflection, and it might even make you feel paranoid. It can be that real. The connection between the work we do inwardly on ourselves and the amount that people perceive heaven as something within themselves and spread out on the earth, as Christ said. Whenever you say the seeker thing, I do think of the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas and teachings of Christ. And I also wanted to tell you that seeker is kind of like a really high level title and initiation in the Sufi system. Like it's way up there. A lot of people think, oh, the seeker is like the beginning, but actually the beginning is where you're being made into how you're learning how to seek, how to open up. It's more like wishing than it is like wanting something or going to try to get it. It's more like you're making space within yourself. And it's also like, I mean, I'm getting older and starting to experiencing some of the indignities of old age and stuff once in a while. And it's kind of like, you wake up and you're not in pain and you're just thankful that you get to breathe. So it's like that kind of a prayer, that kind of a wish.
Yeah,
Just
asking the
arises.
questions have to come before realizing the work that comes to answer those questions and actually putting that into practice.
Sure, our
Well,
work's cut out for us. It's our ordinary life.
I'm very much
And
aligned with your mode of thinking, and I know we're going to talk more and do a lot more together in the future. Is there anything else you want to add that we may not have discussed, or anything that we did discuss but you want to elaborate on in greater detail?
well, first of all, I'd like to say that I'm not making any claims to be any spiritual teacher or anything. I'm completely unworthy of what I've been called to do, but I'm here anyways, having to do my best to meet it well. And there's so much joy in coming together with other people, and there's so little that we can do apart. So I just wish for all of your readers that they forgive people and give up resentments and things and come together in a way that's meaningful to them and to their life and solves their problems, and maybe opens their heart, maybe uplifts them, maybe increases their will to live. I really like your work and your quest, and I think that's helping. Yeah.
I'm doing everything I can. I know you are as well. I think it takes a special person to kind of forsake the comforts of daily living and trying to bring others to awareness, to a higher level of being. just for their own sakes and for global unity, global peace, as you were also mentioning.
Well, I hope that you reach the higher stages of enlightenment and the all of reality becomes the beloved for you, and you are able to keep the attention of the lover on that and experience that bliss.
I feel as though I'm moving on the Plotinus path toward the one. I really appreciate your well wishes, and I'll keep walking up the mountain as long as I can. Thank you so much
Hey,
for your
since you
time.
said towards the one, let's do the Inayati Chisti Sufi prayer. I'll say it. Towards the one, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the messenger, the spirit of guidance. Amen.
So motive be. Well, thank you for your
Yeah.
time. I've really enjoyed talking. Let's definitely do this again soon. Maybe talk about ritual
Yeah, thank
theater.
you very much, dear brother. You're awesome.
And you're
Tomorrow,
awesome as
okay?
well. Thanks for your time.
Peace be with you.